The British experienced one of their darkest hours and one of their brightest hours during that conflict. The Gatlings were used extensively throughout the campaign. One of the earliest usage was at the Battle of Guingamp, in which the Gatlings were unleashed on the Zulus and in fairly short order had killed close to 500 warriors. The British themselves were awestruck at exactly how effective the Gatlings were.
At the defining Battle of Ulundi, the British brought 2 Gatling guns into action. At the end of the day, 2,000 Zulu warriors lay dead. British casualties were a stark contrast. Only 15 killed and 78 injured. 20 years later, in 1898, an American army finally utilized the full power of the Gatling during the Spanish-American War. The final decade of the 19th century was the apex of the Gatling. It was about to be replaced by a far more formidable weapon. The era of the modern machine gun was only just beginning. Until the late 19th century, no gun had been fully automatic, relying on nothing more than the squeeze of the trigger to keep the weapon firing repetitively. The genesis for that gun had occurred in 1866, the same year that Richard Jordan Gatling had perfected the early model of his multiple-barrel Gatling gun. 26-year-old self-taught wood craftsman and inventor Hiram Maxim was on a business trip to Savannah, Georgia. While there, a group of friends invited him to a target practice session. The men were using Springfield rifles, a gun Maxim had only used on rare occasions. He surprised himself and everyone else by shooting quite well. But what left an indelible impression on Maxim was the rifle's powerful kick. Surely, he thought, the energy contained in that recoil can be put to use. The idea was more than a mere inspiration. It would place the development of firearms on a course unlike anything that had come before.
When Hiram Maxim came along in his development of recoil operation, in other words, using the gases or the power of the cartridge itself to operate the mechanism, that would be to load, chamber, and fire the gun when the trigger's pulled, is probably the most significant development in the last century.
Simply stated, Maxim believed that the physical energy of a gun's recoil from the exploding gases of the gunpowder in the cartridge could be harnessed to eject the spent cartridge, feed in a new one, close the breech, release the firing pin, and then continue the cycle for as long as ammunition was available and the weapon's trigger depressed. But little came of his plans. For the moment, Maxim's mind was elsewhere. He started to dabble with inventing electrical equipment, particularly in the field of regulating voltage. His success rate soon rivaled that of his famous contemporary, Thomas Alva Edison. Edison's financial backers became deeply concerned that Maxim's accomplishments might eclipse those of Edison. Maxim was made an offer few could refuse. Edison's backers seduced him into accepting a position to go to Europe for a period of 10 years on behalf of the United States Electric Lighting Company. The salary was considerable, $20,000 a year. Maxim's task was to study European developments in electrical application, but under no circumstances was he allowed to invent any new electrical equipment himself. Believing that he was safely out of the way, Edison's backers breathed a sigh of relief as Maxim sailed for Europe in August 1881. He set up an office in Paris and a few months later was surprised to meet an old friend on a visit from the United States. Their chance encounter would forever change Maxim's life.
It is said that he met a friend in a hotel And the friend said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I'm studying my various electrical devices, you know, and this, that, and the other, incandescent lamps and whatever." And the friend said to him, "Hang your electricity. Just go and invent something that'll make these stupid Europeans kill each other faster." And that was how Maxim is said to have decided to start making a machine gun.
Having taken up residence in London in 1883, Hiram Maxim came up with detailed plans for a fully automatic, magazine-fed rifle that reloaded and continued firing solely due to its recoil action. He took out a British patent for the invention and built a prototype. Using no more manual force than the squeeze of the trigger, the Maxim gun fired up to 10 shots a second. It was revolutionary. Unlike earlier weapons which used magazines, ammunition was fed into the Maxim via a cloth belt holding up to 250 rounds. Because of its high rate of fire, the barrel rapidly became very hot. This posed the danger of a mechanical jam, or worse, a potential explosion. Maxim solved the problem by surrounding the barrel with a water-filled sheath. This distinctive water jacket became a feature of most Maxim guns in subsequent years.
As long as you kept it filled with water, that gun would fire and fire and fire and fire. As long as you kept them cool, and that water jacket around the barrel kept them cool, they would work. And they would work in all kinds of weather, and they were very, very reliable.
Royalty, dignitaries, and many foreign visitors came to Maxim's workshop in London's fashionable Hatton Gardens to see the gun. Though most were highly enthusiastic, some saw the new rapid-fire weapon as a wasteful use of ammunition.
The Maxim, when first demonstrated, achieved quite a bit of interest. Like Denmark, for instance, when they saw it demonstrated, the king said, "Well, this is going to cost us way too much money in ammunition. We're not interested." The British, on the other hand, adopted it fairly rapidly. Their first Maxim gun was adopted in 1891.
With production shared between two plants in England, Maxims were sold to the British War Office and to numerous foreign governments. In 1897, the company was bought out by British manufacturing giant Vickers. It was to become one of the most lucrative and successful armaments manufacturing amalgamations the world had ever known, especially for Hiram Maxim.
He became a shareholder in Vickers, and Vickers became a shareholder in Maxim, and they all climbed into bed with each other and invented the Vickers-Maxim Gun Company. And they made Maxim guns and exported them in all directions. And then Vickers themselves, when the Maxim patents had expired, took the design of the Maxim, made some modifications, turned it upside down, in fact, the mechanism, and recalculated the factors of safety and the thickness of the metal and this, that, and the other, and developed the Vickers gun, which was then in service in the British Army for about 60 years, and was probably the most reliable machine gun ever made.
The gun had first seen service in 1893 against the Matabele in what is now Zimbabwe. Between 1899 and 1902, the Vickers Maxim was also used against white Afrikaner guerrilla freedom fighters during the Boer War in South Africa. By then, Maxim guns were not only being manufactured in England by the Vickers Company, but also under license in Germany, under a manufacturing agreement with the Ludwig Loh Company, subsequently to become known as the Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionsfabrik, or DWM. As the 20th century unfolded, the world's machine gun makers were able to sell every weapon they produced. Although Maxims unquestionably ruled the roost, there were other guns on the market. Since 1895, the Colt Company in the United States had been making an air-cooled machine gun designed by John Browning. It was operated by the pressure of the propellant gas in the gun's barrel acting on the breech assembly. It was a somewhat clumsy weapon, Its operating mechanism was partly external, with a swinging arm mounted beneath the barrel. It was driven by gas pressure from the exploding cartridge acting on a short piston. This extracted the empty cartridge case and loaded a new one. Ammunition was fed into it by a cloth belt, similar to that used on the Maxim gun. Officially called the Colt Model 1895, it was this external mechanical operation that gave the gun its quaint nickname.
The Model 1895 Colt was a recoil-operated gun developed by John Browning, probably the greatest firearms genius that ever lived. It was not a bad weapon. It was light and reasonably reliable, and although its name is derived from kind of a swinging piston that came out from the bottom of the gun when it was fired, and if it was mounted too low, the soldiers would say that it would dig into the ground, and hence the name Potato Digger.